I'm Sarah Mitchell, 28, and I thought I knew what family meant until the most vulnerable moment of my life shattered everything. I believed about the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. When my water broke at 2 a.m. during a family reunion weekend, my husband was 3 states away on a business trip, and I was left gasping in pain, clutching my phone as I called my mother, my sister, anyone who could help me get to the hospital. Call an Uber, my mother said coldly, not even looking up from her crossword puzzle. My sister Emma laughed and muttered something about me being dramatic as usual. But what they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that this night would reveal a truth so devastating it would change our family forever. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who end up paying the highest price for their cruelty. The Uber app showed 3 minutes until arrival, but each second stretched like hours as another contraction gripped me. I sat on the front porch of my childhood home, the same porch where I'd waited for rides to school dances that never came, where I'd practiced piano pieces that no one ever bothered to listen to. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was again, waiting for someone who actually cared enough to show up. When the silver Honda pulled up, I could see the driver's concerned face through the windshield. Marcus, according to the app. He jumped out immediately, rushing around to help me into the car. "Hospital?" he asked, and I could only nod between breaths. Behind me, the house remained dark, except for the living room where my family continued their evening, as if nothing had happened. "My wife had 4 kids, Marcus said gently as he adjusted his mirrors. "I know this is scary, but you're going to be okay." "How far apart are the contractions?" I tried to focus on his calm voice instead of the burning sensation radiating through my back. "About 5 minutes now," I managed, clutching the receipt he'd given me, the only proof I had of this moment, of someone actually helping me when I needed it most. The city lights blurred past as we drove through empty streets. I remember thinking how different this was from how I'd imagined it would go. In my mind, there had always been excitement, someone timing contractions, a rushed but joyful drive with my husband or my mother fussing over me. Instead, there was just Marcus, a stranger whose kindness was already more than my own family had shown. "You got someone meeting you at the hospital?" he asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "My husband's traveling for work," I said, which was true. What I didn't say was that he was the only one who would have dropped everything to be there, and he was currently on a red-eye flight back from Seattle. 3 time zones away. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and I gripped the door handle. Marcus pulled over, hazard lights flashing. "Breathe," he said, "in through your nose, out through your mouth." That's what my wife always did. He waited patiently until it passed, then continued driving. I found myself thinking about Emma, my sister, laughing at me. "Dramatic as usual," she'd said. The same Emma who'd called me sobbing when she'd broken a nail before her wedding, expecting me to drop everything and rush over with supplies. The same Emma who'd had our entire family rallying around her during her divorce, bringing casseroles and babysitting her kids while she found herself at expensive spa retreats. When had I become the person they could dismiss so easily? Marcus pulled up to the emergency entrance, and before I could even reach for my wallet, he was out of the car, helping me to my feet. "You keep that money," he said when I tried to pay. "Some things are more important than a fare." A nurse was already approaching with a wheelchair, and as I sank into it, I looked back at Marcus. He gave me a thumbs up through his window before driving away, leaving me with a stranger who cared more about my well-being than the people who'd raised me. The hospital bracelet cut into my wrist as I gripped the bed rails, but I barely noticed. Room 314 had become my entire world, sterile and bright and filled with the steady beep of monitors that tracked my daughter's heartbeat. The nurse, Maria, had kind eyes and gentle hands, And she'd been checking on me every 20 minutes since I'd arrived. "You're doing great, honey," she said, adjusting my fore. "Still no word from your family?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. I'd sent 3 text messages to the family group chat, each one more desperate than the last. The first had been simple: in labor, heading to St. Mary's. The second: "Please, I need someone here." The third, sent an hour ago: "She's coming soon. I'm scared." All 3 showed as read. 0 responses. Between contractions, I stared at the empty chairs meant for family members. This should have been nervous pacing, someone holding my hand, taking pictures to capture this moment. Instead, there was just me and the rotating shift of nurses who'd adopted me as their temporary family. "What's her name going to be?" asked Jenny, the night nurse who'd just come on duty. She was young, maybe fresh out of nursing school, with enthusiasm that reminded me of myself before life taught me that caring too much was dangerous. "Emma," I said, the word tasting bitter. "After my sister." Jenny smiled. "That's a beautiful name, family name, something like that." I didn't tell her that I'd chosen it months ago, back when I still believed Emma cared about me, when I thought she'd be honored to have her niece named after her. Now it felt like a cruel joke, but it was too late to change it. The contractions were coming faster now, each one stealing my breath and clearing my mind of everything except the primal need to bring my daughter safely into this world. Dr. Peterson arrived, professional and reassuring, and suddenly the room filled with purposeful activity. "Okay, Sarah, it's time," she said. "On the next contraction, I need you to push." What followed was a blur of pain and effort, and Maria's steady voice counting, 1, 2, 3, breathe. No one was filming it. No one was crying happy tears. No one was telling me how proud they were of me. But somehow, in that sterile room surrounded by medical professionals who'd never met me before tonight, I felt more supported than I had in years. And then she was here. Emma Rose Mitchell. 6 pounds and 3 ounces of perfect screaming life. They placed her on my chest. I forgot everything else. The pain, the abandonment, the years of feeling invisible. There was only this moment and this tiny person who depended entirely on me. "She was beautiful," Maria whispered, and I could see tears in her eyes. "Look at all that hair." I touched my daughter's soft head, still unable to believe she was real. She was mine. She was here despite everything. In that moment, I made her a promise. She would never feel the way I felt tonight. She would never question whether she mattered, never doubt that she was loved unconditionally. Dr. Peterson finished the medical necessities while I held Emma, studying every perfect detail of her face. She had my nose, but her father's chin, and when she opened her eyes for the first time, they were the deepest blue I'd ever seen. "Has anyone contacted your husband?" Jenny asked quietly. "He's on a plane," I said. "Should land in about an hour. At least David would come. At least my daughter would have one parent who put her first." They moved us to a recovery room, and as I settled in with Emma sleeping against my chest, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My family hadn't just missed my daughter's birth. They had chosen to miss it. They had actively decided that whatever they were doing was more important than being here for the most significant moment of my life. The hospital bracelet would eventually come off, but I knew I'd keep it. Not as a memento of joy, but as a reminder of the night I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up when it matters most. I found the photo while going through old albums during Emma's first week home. There we all were at my sister Emma's wedding 3 years ago, a perfect family portrait on the church steps. Mom and Dad beaming in the center, the bride and groom radiant beside them, and there I was, barely visible on the far edge, half cut out of the frame. It was such a perfect metaphor for my entire childhood that I almost laughed. Emma had always been the sun in our family's solar system, with the rest of us orbiting around her brilliance. 2 years older than me, She'd emerged from the womb with an innate understanding of how to command attention and keep it. While I spent my childhood trying to earn love through good grades and helpful behavior, Emma simply existed and was adored. For breathing, I remember when we were 7 and 9, I'd practiced piano for months to perfect a piece for the school recital. Emma decided last minute that she wanted to sing instead of play violin. Suddenly, the entire family was rallying around Emma's natural talent, buying her new dresses, arranging private voice lessons, while I continued my daily practice in the basement where no one could hear Dot at the recital. Emma forgot half the lyrics to her song, but charmed the audience with her improvised humming. She received a standing ovation and flowers from 3 different families. I played my piece flawlessly, not a single missed note in a complex batch invention, and got polite applause and a nice job. Sweetie from Dad thought that night. I found Emma in the kitchen being fed cake by Mom, who was gushing about her little star. When I asked if anyone wanted to hear me play the piano piece again, Mom said, "Maybe later, honey." Emma's telling us about her performance. Later never came. The pattern repeated through high school. Emma's C+ report card was celebrated as improvement, while my straight A's were expected and barely acknowledged. When Emma crashed Dad's car junior year, the family rallied to help her through the traumatic experience. When I worked 2 jobs to save for college, no one seemed to notice the dark circles under my eyes or the way I fell asleep at dinner. College was supposed to be my escape, my chance to shine somewhere else. I threw myself into my studies, made Dean's List every semester, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration. I was so proud when I walked across that stage, finally having something that was entirely mine, an achievement that had nothing to do with Emma. But even then, the celebration dinner was cut short because Emma called crying about her latest boyfriend. Drama. Within an hour, we were all at her apartment, my graduation forgotten as we helped Emma process her feelings about a guy who'd been dating her for 3 whole weeks. The wedding photo captured the pinnacle of Emma's golden child status. She'd met Derek at a coffee shop and was engaged within 6 months. The wedding cost more than my college tuition, with a guest list of 200 people and a dress that cost more than my car. Mom spent months planning every detail, calling it the wedding of the century. I was the maid of honor, naturally, which meant I got to plan the bridal shower, the bachelorette party, and organize the other bridesmaids, all while working full-time and helping Mom with logistics. When I suggested maybe keeping costs reasonable since I knew Dad was struggling with his business, Mom looked at me like I'd suggested serving hot dogs at the reception. "This is Emma's special day," she said. "We'll make it work." They did make it work by taking out a second mortgage on the house. But Emma's happiness was worth any sacrifice, apparently. Standing in that photo, smiling for the camera while feeling invisible, I remember thinking that maybe once Emma was settled and happy, there would finally be room for me to matter. Maybe my parents would notice that I existed, that I had dreams and needs to dot instead. Emma's marriage became another source of family drama. She called constantly with complaints about Derek, about marriage being harder than expected, about feeling overwhelmed by adult responsibilities. And of course, everyone dropped everything to support her through her adjustment period. When Derek lost his job, Emma moved back home for just a few months while they got back on their feet. Those few months turned into a year, during which I was expected to help with their bills because I was doing so well in my career. Looking at that wedding photo now, holding my own daughter, I finally understood something that had taken me 28 years to see. I wasn't cut out of the frame by accident. I was systematically pushed to the margins by a family that had decided long ago who mattered and who didn't. But my Emma, my beautiful baby girl sleeping peacefully in her crib, would never know what it felt like to be invisible. She would never stand at the edge of a family photo, wondering if anyone would notice if she wasn't there at all. Grandma Rose's will reading should have been a somber occasion, but it turned into the moment I realized just how deep the family's favoritism ran. The lawyer's office felt too bright, too sterile for something that should have been about grief and memory. Instead, it became about numbers and who deserved what. I'd been the one caring for Grandma Rose in her final years. Every Sunday dinner, every doctor's appointment, every middle of the night phone call when she was confused or scared. Emma lived 20 minutes away, but somehow was always too busy with her marriage, her job, her various crises to visit regularly. "Knows you're good with that stuff," Emma had said when I'd suggested maybe we could share the responsibility. "Besides, you don't have kids yet, so you have more time." More time, as if my life was just a holding pattern until I achieved the same milestones that made Emma's time too precious to spare. The will was vintage Grandma Rose detailed, specific and brutally honest in ways that would have made her laugh if she'd been there to see our faces. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, cleared his throat and began reading in his careful, legal voice. Emma inherited the house, the beautiful Victorian that had been in our family for 3 generations, with its wraparound porch and original hardwood floors. Market value, $340,000. She also got Grandma's jewelry collection, including a diamond engagement ring that had been passed down through 4 generations of women. The antique furniture, the china set, the silver tea service that Grandma Rose had polished religiously every month. I inherited the responsibility of caring for our aging parents. Oh, it wasn't worded quite that bluntly. The will specified that I would receive Grandma's caregiving fund, $15,000, designated for family care and support. The lawyer explained that this came with the expectation that I would be the primary caregiver for Mom and Dad when they needed it, since I had demonstrated such devotion to family throughout the years. Emma looked appropriately surprised and offered to help however she could, but we both knew what this meant. I'd just inherited a job, while she'd inherited a fortune. The most devastating part came at the end, when Mr. Patterson read Grandma Rose's personal note to each of us. Emma's was full of praise for her beauty, her spirit, her ability to light up any room. Mine acknowledged my steadfast nature and reliable character, and thanked me for being the kind of granddaughter who could always be counted on, reliable, steadfast. Counted on. Even in death, Grandma Rose had reduced me to my function rather than celebrating who I was as a person. The drive home was silent except for Emma's occasional comments about needing to figure out what to do with such a big house. She was already making plans, talking about renovations and maybe renting it out for extra income. The jewelry would need to be appraised for insurance purposes. The furniture might need to be stored since her current place was too small. I thought about the $15,000 sitting in my bank account and what it would actually cost to care for aging parents. Dad had been having heart problems, and Mom's arthritis was getting worse. Neither of them had long-term care insurance, and Medicare wouldn't cover everything they'd eventually need. $15,000 might last 6 months if we were lucky. That evening, I sat in my small apartment and did the math. David and I have been saving for a house, slowly building up our down payment while paying off student loans and trying to build some financial security. We've been so careful, so responsible, making spreadsheets and budgets and sacrificing little luxuries to reach our goals. Now, those goals felt impossibly far away. If I was going to be responsible for my parents' care, I'd need to start saving for their future instead of my own. The house fund would become the parent care fund. The vacation we'd been planning would be canceled. The business idea I'd been developing would have to wait indefinitely. Meanwhile, Emma had just been handed a house worth more than I'd make in 5 years. I called David, who was still traveling, and tried to explain the situation without sounding bitter. He listened patiently as I walked through the numbers, the implications. The way my entire financial future had just been restructured by a decision made before I was even born. "It's not fair," he said finally, and I almost cried with relief. That someone else could see it. "But it's what she wanted," I replied, already falling into the family pattern of accepting whatever was decided for me. "What she wanted was to make sure your parents are cared for," David said, "but that doesn't mean it has to destroy your life. There are other options: care facilities, shared responsibility, government programs." I wanted to believe him, but I already knew how this would play out. Emma would be happy to help with big decisions, but the day-to-day reality would fall to me. When Dad needed help with medication management, they'd call me. When Mom needed rides to physical therapy, I'd rearrange my schedule. When difficult conversations about their future needed to happen, I'd be the one having them because I was reliable. I was steadfast. I could always be counted on. Looking back now, I realized that while reading was the beginning of my awakening. For the first time, I saw clearly how the family had divided us into roles. Emma was the beloved, to be protected and provided for. I was the caregiver, to be utilized and depended upon. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice began asking a question that would grow louder over the coming years. What would happen if the reliable one decided to stop being so reliable? The stack of medical bills on my kitchen table had grown so high it was starting to tip over. Each envelope represented another piece of my life being consumed by the role I'd never asked for, but seemed destined to fulfill. Dad's cardiac specialist, Mom's rheumatologist, physical therapy sessions, prescription costs that insurance barely touched, it all came to me. Sarah handles the financial stuff, Mom would tell the doctors, as if managing their health care was my chosen profession rather than something that had simply fallen to me by default. Emma would nod along during the rare family meetings about their care, taking notes she'd never look at again and making suggestions she'd never follow through on. I'd been promoted to senior analyst at my company 6 months earlier. Achievement that should have marked the beginning of my career taking off. Instead, I'd had to turn down the travel opportunities that came with the position because someone needed to drive Dad to his appointments. The networking events were impossible because Mom needed help organizing her medications. The professional development courses I'd been excited about were sacrificed to afternoon phone calls with insurance companies, taught my supervisor. Jennifer called me into her office on a Tuesday morning after I'd missed another client meeting due to a medical emergency. Dad had fallen in the bathroom, nothing serious, but Mom had panicked and called me instead of 911. By the time I'd gotten them sorted out and ensured Dad was okay, the meeting with our biggest potential client was over. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about your availability," Jennifer said, closing her office door. "I know you're dealing with family issues, and I respect that, but this is the third meeting you've missed this month." I sank into the chair across from her desk, already knowing where this conversation was headed. "I understand, and I'm sorry. My parents are having health issues, and have you considered other care options?" she asked gently. "There are adult day programs, home health aides, family members who could share the responsibility." I almost laughed. My sister helps when she can, but she has her own life. It was the lie I'd been telling for so long. I almost believed it myself. Jennifer leaned forward. "Sarah, you're talented and you have real potential here. But I need someone who can be fully present for this role. If you can't make that commitment, maybe we should discuss other positions within the company." Other positions? Code for a demotion, less money, fewer opportunities. All because I was the designated family caregiver. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the calculator and the stack of bills, trying to make numbers work that simply wouldn't. Even with my salary, David's income, and what was left of Grandma Rose's fund, we were barely breaking even on my parents' care costs. The house down payment fund had been emptied months ago. Our emergency savings were gone. David found me there at midnight, surrounded by papers and looking defeated. "We need to talk to Emma," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "This isn't sustainable." "Emma's dealing with her own financial stress," I replied automatically. It was true she'd mentioned that Derek's new business wasn't doing as well as expected, and they were having trouble with their mortgage payments on the inherited house. "Sarah," David's voice was firm, "look at these numbers. Look at what this is costing us, not just financially, but professionally, emotionally. This isn't fair to you, and it's not fair to our future." He was right, but admitting it felt like betraying everything I'd been raised to believe about family obligation. Good daughters took care of their parents. Reliable people didn't complain about doing what needed to be done. And Emma had always been exempt from the messy aspects of family responsibility. The next day, I called Emma and asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss our parents' care plan. She agreed readily, probably assuming I just wanted to update her on their condition rather than ask for actual help. We met at the coffee shop where she'd met Derek, the same place where her fairy tale had begun while mine seemed to be ending. She looked good. She always looked good, with a new haircut and designer handbag that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "How are Mom and Dad doing?" she asked, stirring her latte. "They're managing, but the costs are becoming overwhelming," I said carefully. I was hoping we could discuss sharing some of the financial responsibility. Emma's face immediately shifted into what I recognized as her defensive expression. "Sarah, Derek and I are struggling right now. The business is just getting off the ground, and we're already stretched thin with the house payments." "The house that you inherited mortgage-free," I said, surprising myself with my directness. "That doesn't mean it's free to maintain," she replied. "Property taxes, insurance, repairs, it's expensive to own a house that size." I pulled out my phone and showed her a spreadsheet I'd created. "This is what I've spent on their care in the last 6 months. Not including my time, just the direct costs." She glanced at the numbers and winced. "That does seem like a lot. It is a lot. And it's only going to get worse as they age." Emma was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to her. Then she said, "Have you looked into Medicaid?" I heard there are programs for families in situations like this. I stared at her. "Emma, they have assets. Dad's pension, Mom's Social Security, savings. They don't qualify for Medicaid, and even if they did, the quality of care..." "I'm just trying to think of options," she said defensively. "I wish I could help more, but honestly, Sarah, you're so much better at this stuff than I am. You understand all the insurance forms and medical terminology. When I try to help, I just get confused and probably make things worse." It was masterful, really. In 3 sentences, she'd complimented my competence, highlighted her own incompetence, and made it sound like my taking on everything was actually the best solution for everyone involved. I left that coffee shop knowing that nothing would change. Emma would continue to live in her inherited house, managing her own financial problems while I managed everyone else's. The reliable daughter would keep being reliable until there was nothing left of her own dreams to sacrifice. The rejection letter from the bank arrived on the same day. Emma posted photos of her latest weekend getaway to Napa Valley. I held the thin envelope in my hands, already knowing what it contained, while my phone buzzed with notifications from Emma's social media posts: wine tasting, expensive dinners, luxury hotel rooms with Derek. "We regret to inform you that your application for a small business loan has been denied due to insufficient collateral and high debt-to-income ratio." I'd spent months developing the business plan for my consulting firm. Market research, financial projections, competitive analysis, everything the bank had requested during our initial meeting. The loan officer had seemed encouraging, especially when I'd explained my background in business analysis and the growing demand for independent consulting services in our area, But that was before they'd run the numbers on my current financial situation, before they'd seen how much of my income was already committed to my parents' care, before they'd realized that the woman sitting across from them wasn't a free agent pursuing her entrepreneurial dreams, but someone whose life was already mortgaged to other people's needs. David found me at the kitchen table that evening, staring at the rejection letter while the business plan I'd worked on for 6 months sat beside it, suddenly transformed from a roadmap to the future into evidence of my own naivety. "I'm sorry," he said, reading over my shoulder, "but this isn't the end. We can try other banks, look into SBA loans, maybe find private investors." I laughed bitterly. "With what collateral?" "We don't own a house, we don't have significant savings, and my credit report shows thousands of dollars in medical debt that isn't even mine." "The medical debt is for your parents' care. Any reasonable lender would understand, would they?" I interrupted. "Or would they see someone who's financially overextended and likely to default when the next family crisis hits?" The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been the responsible one, the one who'd made smart financial decisions, paid off my student loans early, built good credit, but responsibility had become a trap. The more reliable I proved myself to be, the more my family depended on me, until my reliability had consumed my ability to take risks or pursue opportunities. I thought about Emma's weekend in Napa, the casual way she spent money that I could only dream of having. 2 years earlier, when she'd wanted to open a boutique clothing store, the entire family had rallied around her vision. Dad had co-signed her business loan. Mom had helped with the initial inventory purchases, and even Grandma Rose had contributed. Startup funds. The boutique had lasted 8 months before Emma decided retail was too stressful, and she wanted to focus on her marriage instead. The remaining inventory had been sold at a loss, and Dad had quietly absorbed the loan payments until it was paid off. But when I'd mentioned my consulting business idea at a family dinner, the response had been markedly different. "That sounds complicated," Mom had said. "Do you really have time for something like that with everything else on your plate? Small businesses are so risky," Dad had added. "Maybe you should focus on advancing in your current job instead." Emma had nodded along. Starting a business is so much work. I barely had time for anything else when I had the boutique. "And you're already so busy with Mom and Dad's appointments and everything." No one had offered to invest. No one had asked to see my business plan. No one had suggested they could temporarily take on some of the caregiving responsibilities to free up my time and energy for the venture. Instead, they treated my ambition like an inconvenience that might interfere with my availability to serve. Their needs. The rejection letter sat on my table for weeks, a daily reminder of dreams deferred. Sometimes I'd catch myself revising the business plan in my mind, finding ways to make it work with less startup capital, more conservative projections. But the numbers never added up, not with my current obligations. One evening, while I was helping Mom organize her prescription medications, she mentioned that Emma and Derek were considering expanding the inherited house. "They want to add a master suite," Mom said, sorting pills into weekly containers. "Emma says the current master bedroom is too small for all their furniture." I kept my face neutral while calculating how much a master suite addition would cost versus how much I'd needed for my business loan. "That sounds expensive." "Oh, I'm sure they'll figure it out," Mom said dismissively. "Emma's always been good at making things work." Making things work. Another way of saying that Emma had always had family support for her dreams, while I'd been expected to make mine work alone, around the edges of everyone else's needs. That night, I finally put the business plan away in a file folder marked "Someday." It joined other folders labeled house plans, vacation ideas, and career goals, a growing collection of dreams that had been postponed indefinitely in service of other people's immediate needs. I told myself it was temporary. Once my parents were more stable, once their care was better organized, once Emma stepped up to help more, then I could revisit my own ambitions. But deep down, I was beginning to understand that someday was just another way of saying never. When you were the family's designated caregiver, there would always be another crisis, another need, another reason why my dreams had to wait while everyone else's took priority. The rejected loan application became another artifact of my invisible life, proof of roads not taken and futures sacrificed for the privilege of being reliable. The pregnancy test sat on my bathroom counter like a tiny beacon of hope in a life that had felt increasingly gray. 2 pink lines, clear and undeniable, promising something that was entirely mine and David's a future that no one else could claim or redirect. I'd been feeling off for weeks, but had attributed it to stress from managing my parents' escalating health issues and the disappointment of the rejected business loan. When I'd finally missed my second period, David had gently suggested I take a test, his eyes bright with possibility neither of us dared voice. Now here it was, proof that despite everything else falling apart, something beautiful was beginning. David's flight wasn't due back from his conference until evening, so I had hours to sit with this secret, to imagine how our lives would change. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of pure excitement about the future. This baby would be loved unconditionally, would never have to earn affection through usefulness or sacrifice their own dreams for family duty. I found myself making mental lists of everything we'd need to do doctor's appointments, nursery planning, budget adjustments. The consulting business would have to wait even longer now, but somehow that felt okay. This was more important than any career ambition. When David came home that evening, I met him at the door with the test in my hand and tears in my eyes. "Really?" he asked, pulling me into his arms when I nodded. "Really?" I whispered against his shoulder. "We're going to have a baby." We spent the evening in our small living room, talking about names and timing, about how we'd rearrange our 1-bedroom apartment to make space for a crib. David was already calculating how much paternity leave he could take, and I was thinking about the childcare options near my office dot for those few hours. It felt like our life was finally beginning, like all the waiting and sacrificing and putting everyone else first had been preparation for this moment when we'd finally get to prioritize our own family. I waited until the next Sunday dinner to tell my parents and Emma. I'd imagine their reactions, Mom crying happy tears, Dad talking about becoming a grandfather, Emma getting excited about becoming an aunt. I'd even thought about how this might bring us closer together, give Emma a reason to visit more often and be more involved in family life. The reality was more subdued than I'd hoped. "Well, that's wonderful news," Mom said, giving me a careful hug that felt more obligatory than enthusiastic. "Though I hope this won't interfere with Dad's upcoming surgery." Dad had been scheduled for a minor cardiac procedure, nothing serious, but it would require someone to drive him to and from the hospital and help with his recovery for a few days. "Of course not," I said quickly. "The baby isn't due until October. Dad's surgery is in April. I'll be fine to help." Emma smiled and congratulated me, but I caught her exchanging a look with Mom that I couldn't quite interpret. Later, as we were cleaning up dinner dishes, she pulled me aside. "Are you sure about the timing?" she asked quietly. "I mean, with everything going on with Mom and Dad and your job situation." "What job situation?" I asked, confused. "You said you were having trouble with all the time off for their appointments. Adding a baby to that, it just seems like a lot." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Emma, having a baby is a good thing. David and I are happy about this." "I'm not saying it's not good," she said defensively. "I'm just thinking practically. Babies are expensive, and you're already stretched thin financially with Mom and Dad's care costs." The conversation left me feeling deflated in a way I hadn't expected. I thought my pregnancy would be celebrated, that my family would be excited about welcoming a new member. Instead, It felt like they saw it as an inconvenience that might interfere with my availability to serve their needs. Over the following weeks, their lukewarm response became a pattern. When I mentioned needing to find a new doctor since my current one didn't deliver at the hospital I preferred, Mom suggested I just stay with my current doctor to avoid complications. When I talked about converting our spare room into a nursery, Dad wondered aloud if we'd still have space for him to stay. Overnight after his surgery, even my pregnancy seemed to be viewed through the lens of how it might affect my ability to be their caregiver. The worst moment came when I had to miss one of Dad's pre-surgery appointments due to severe morning sickness. I'd been throwing up for hours and could barely stand, let alone drive across town and sit in the waiting room for 2 hours. Emma had to take him instead, her first hands-on involvement in their care in months. That was exhausting, she complained to me later. I don't know how you do it all the time. And the appointment took forever. I had to cancel my lunch plans. Instead of gaining appreciation for what I'd been doing alone for years, she seemed annoyed that she'd been inconvenienced for a single afternoon. That night, lying in bed with David's hand on my still flat belly, I made another promise to our unborn child. This baby would grow up knowing they were wanted, planned for, celebrated. They would never feel like their existence was a burden or an interruption to more important things. And if my family couldn't summon genuine enthusiasm for the most important thing that had ever happened to me, then maybe it was time to start questioning exactly what kind of family I was so desperately trying to serve. The pregnancy test sat in my nightstand drawer, a talisman of transformation. I didn't know it yet, but that positive result had started a countdown. Not just to my daughter's birth, but to the moment when I'd finally understand the difference between being needed and being valued. The family group chat had been buzzing for weeks about the reunion weekend. Emma had suggested we all stay at the inherited house since it had plenty of room and everyone could catch up properly. It would be the first time in years that all the extended family would be together: aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen since Grandma Rose's funeral. I was 8 months pregnant by then, moving slowly but still excited about the gathering. David had planned to come, but a last-minute work crisis had sent him to Seattle for an emergency client meeting. I considered skipping the weekend myself, but Mom had made such a point about how important it was for family to be together that I'd packed my overnight bag and made the drive to Emma's house. The group chat screenshots I'd saved on my phone told a story I hadn't fully understood at the time. Scrolling through them later, I could see the subtle coordination happening behind my back. Emma, should we tell Sarah about the surprise baby shower plans? Mom, maybe keep it simple. She's been so tired lately. Aunt Linda, I thought we were doing gifts for everyone's babies. Didn't Cousin Michelle just have one too? Emma, Michelle's baby was born in spring. Different timing. Mom, let's just focus on making it a nice family weekend. At the time, I interpreted these messages as concern for my energy levels. Now I could see them for what they really were: a family quietly deciding that my pregnancy wasn't worth the same celebration they'd given others. The house looked beautiful when I arrived Friday evening. Emma had decorated with string lights and fresh flowers, and the dining room table was set for 12. Everyone was arriving over the weekend, and there was an excitement in the air that I'd missed during the quiet, medical appointment-focused gatherings of recent months. Sarah, Emma hugged me carefully, avoiding my belly. Look at you, so pregnant. It wasn't exactly the warm welcome I'd hoped for, but I was grateful to be included. I settled into the guest room that had once been my childhood bedroom, now redecorated. In Emma's style, but still recognizable as the place where I'd spent countless hours reading and dreaming about my future. The weekend started well. Friday night dinner was relaxed and full of laughter, with everyone catching up and sharing news. I talked about the pregnancy, about David's work, about how we were preparing for the baby. People seemed genuinely interested, asking about due dates and nursery plans. But as the weekend progressed, I began to notice things. Small things at first, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, whispered discussions that seemed to involve a lot of planning. When I asked if I could help with anything, I was told to rest, to not worry about it, to just enjoy being taken care of for once. Saturday morning, I overheard Emma on the phone with someone saying, "We decided to keep it low key." She's been dealing with so much stress lately, and we didn't want to overwhelm her. I assumed she was talking about the weekend activities, maybe explaining why they'd chosen a quiet gathering over something more elaborate. The truth became clear. Saturday afternoon, cousin Michelle arrived with her 3-month-old son, and within minutes, the entire family had transformed into celebration mode. Someone had been hiding decorations in the garage, blue and silver balloons, a "Welcome Baby James" banner, a table full of wrapped gifts. I watched from the living room window as they quickly set up what was clearly a planned baby shower for Michelle. The coordination was flawless, suggesting weeks of preparation. The same family members who had told me they were keeping things simple were now arranging elaborate displays and organizing group photos around Michelle and her baby. Surprise! Everyone shouted when Michelle pretended to be shocked by the setup. I stood there, 8 months pregnant, watching my family throw a baby shower for my cousin's 3-month-old while carefully ensuring I didn't know about it. When someone noticed me at the window, Emma quickly came inside. "We thought you might be too tired for all the excitement," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You know how these things can get loud and overwhelming?" "You threw Michelle a baby shower," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Well, she didn't get one when the baby was born because of timing issues. We thought it would be nice to celebrate now." The explanation sounded reasonable, but I could see through it. Michelle lived 2 states away and rarely visited. Her baby had been born in May, and it was now September. If they'd wanted to throw her a shower, they'd had months to coordinate it. The real reason became clear when I heard Aunt Linda talking to Emma later. "I think this was the right choice. Sarah's been so focused on medical issues with your parents, and with David traveling so much for work. This just felt more joyful. Because my pregnancy, my family situation, my life had become associated with stress and obligation rather than celebration. I spent the rest of the afternoon watching from the margins as my family celebrated Michelle's baby with enthusiasm they'd never shown for mine. They passed him around, took photos, talked about how perfect he was. The gifts were thoughtful and expensive things. They clearly put time and effort in selecting. When someone asked about my due date, the conversation quickly shifted to other topics. When I mentioned that David and I were nervous about becoming first-time parents, I got practical advice rather than excitement. It was as if my pregnancy was a medical condition to be managed rather than a blessing to be celebrated that Sunday morning. As I packed to leave, I found myself looking through the house for any sign that my pregnancy had been acknowledged during the weekend. There were still blue balloons tied to chairs from Michelle's shower, leftover cake in the refrigerator with "Baby James" written in frosting dot in the guest room. I noticed something I'd missed before, a small wrapped gift on the dresser with my name on it. Inside was a practical maternity pillow and a note from Mom for comfortable sleeping. "Hope this helps with the back pain." It was thoughtful in a utilitarian way, like everything my family gave me. Practical gifts for practical problems, never anything that suggested they saw joy or beauty in my life. Driving home that Sunday, I realized the reunion weekend had been a preview of how my daughter's childhood would unfold if I let it. She'd be the practical child, the one expected to understand why other kids got bigger celebrations, better gifts, more attention. She'd learn to be grateful for utilitarian love while watching other family members receive the kind of wholehearted Enthusiasm that makes children feel truly cherished. The group chat continued buzzing after the weekend, full of thank yous and photos from Michelle's shower. I wasn't tagged in any of the pictures, and no one asked if I'd had a good time or if the weekend had been what I'd hoped for, but I'd gotten something valuable from that weekend, even if it wasn't what I'd expected. I'd gotten clarity about exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy of care and just how far they'd go to ensure I stayed there. The voice recording on my phone captured everything. I'd started recording the calls without really thinking about it. Some instinct telling me I needed proof of what happened that night. Proof that I wasn't being dramatic, wasn't exaggerating, wasn't misremembering the way my family abandoned me when I needed them most. The first call was to Mom at 2:17 a.m. I can hear my own voice, strained and scared. Mom, my water broke. I'm having contractions every 5 minutes. I need someone to drive me to the hospital. Her response, clear as day on the recording. Sarah, it's the middle of the night. Can't you call an Uber? I'm not dressed, and your father needs his sleep before his appointment tomorrow. Dad's appointment. A routine follow-up with his cardiologist that wasn't until 3 p.m. the next day. But apparently, his sleep was more important than my labor. The second call was to Emma at 2:23 a.m. Emma, please. I'm in labor and David's in Seattle. I need help getting to the hospital. I can hear her yawning on the recording. Then Derek's voice in the background asking what was going on. Then Emma, seriously, Sarah? It's 2 a.m. Call an Uber or something. I have that early meeting tomorrow and I can't function without sleep. The early meeting with her yoga instructor. I knew this because she'd mentioned it 3 times at dinner the night before, talking about how important it was to maintain her wellness routine. The third call was back to Mom at 2:31 a.m., my voice higher now, more desperate. Mom, please, I'm scared. I don't want to do this alone. Sarah, you're being dramatic. Women have babies every day. The hospital has doctors and nurses who know what they're doing. You don't need us there holding your hand. Dramatic. The word that had followed me through my entire childhood, used whenever I expressed any need or emotion that inconvenienced anyone else. The fourth call was to Emma again at 2:38 a.m. Emma, I'm begging you, please just drive me to the hospital. I'll pay for gas, I'll pay for your time, oh my God, Sarah, stop calling. You're being ridiculous, it's not an emergency. You're pregnant, not dying. Figure it out yourself for once. Figure it out myself. For once. As if I hadn't been figuring everything out myself for years while they all benefited from my competence and reliability. The final call was to Mom at 2:44 a.m. And by then I was crying. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I can't believe my own family won't help me have my baby. Don't be so melodramatic, Sarah. You'll be fine. Call us when the baby's born and let us know how it went. Click. I sat on that porch for another 10 minutes after the last call, clutching my phone and trying to process what had just happened. My daughter was coming, ready or not, and the people who were supposed to love me most in the world had just told me to handle it alone. Each of them had treated my labor like an inconvenience, my fear like an overreaction, my need for support like an unreasonable demand. Not one of them had asked if I was okay, if the baby was okay, if there were any complications. They'd all assumed it was just routine, just another dramatic Sarah moment that they could dismiss and ignore. The Uber app showed Marcus was 3 minutes away when I finally accepted that no one was coming. 3 minutes until a stranger would show me more kindness than my own family had in 28 years. Listening to those recordings now, weeks later with my daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib, I can hear something in my voice that I didn't recognize at the time. Underneath the fear and desperation, there's something else, a dawning realization that this was who they really were when the mask slipped, when being family required actual sacrifice rather than just words. The most devastating part wasn't their refusal to help. It was how easily they dismissed my need, how quickly they made it clear that their minor inconveniences mattered more than my major life event. Mom's sleep schedule and Dad's unnecessary rest before a routine appointment, Emma's yoga meeting, and her general annoyance at being asked to care about anyone else. I'd spent years making excuses for them, telling myself they loved me but just showed it differently. I convinced myself that they simply didn't understand how much I was sacrificing for the family, that if they knew, they'd appreciate it more. But that night, they showed me exactly how much they understood and exactly how little they cared. The voice recording became my evidence, not for any legal purpose, but for my own sanity. And I started doubting myself when I began to wonder if maybe I had been dramatic or unreasonable. I could listen to those calls and remember the cold indifference in their voices. They hadn't been confused or unprepared or caught off guard. They'd been clear about their priorities, and I wasn't one of them. That realization was devastating, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I saw my family without the filter of hope or expectation. I saw them as they really were, people who took what I offered but gave nothing meaningful in return, who expected my devotion but couldn't summon even basic compassion when I needed it most. My daughter would never hear those recordings. Would never know how her birth was marked by their absence rather than their celebration, but she would grow up understanding that love means showing up, that family means being there when it matters. That reliability works both ways, and someday when she was old enough to understand, I would tell her about the night she was born, not the sad parts about being abandoned, but the beautiful part about how sometimes strangers can show you more love than the people who claim to know you best. The voice recording sat on my phone like a time capsule, preserving the exact moment when everything changed, when I finally heard them clearly enough to understand what I needed to do next. Marcus Williams kept his business card and the visor of his Honda Civic, right next to his insurance information and a photo of his 4 kids. He handed it to me through the hospital window after refusing my payment, his kind eyes still full of concern even though his job was technically done. Marcus Williams, Uber driver, was printed in simple black text, but underneath in smaller letters it said, "Father of 4, happy to help new parents." He had added that line himself, he told me later, after too many rides like mine women in labor. New fathers panicking, families in crisis needing more than just transportation. "You call me if you need anything," he said that night, pressing the card into my palm. Rides home from the hospital, grocery runs when you're too tired to get out with a newborn, whatever. My wife says the first few weeks are the hardest. I tucked the card into my hospital gown pocket, thinking I'd probably never use it. How could I explain to a stranger that I'd need his help because my own family couldn't be bothered to check on me? But 3 days later, when it was time to leave the hospital, I called him. David had made it back from Seattle and was wonderful, but he had to go back to work. The discharge process took longer than expected, and I was overwhelmed by all the instructions about feeding schedules and warning signs to watch for. When the nurse asked if someone was picking us up, I looked at my phone and saw 0 messages from my family asking how we were doing. Marcus arrived with a car seat already, installed in his back seat, and a small gift bag on the front passenger seat. From my wife, Rosa, he explained as he carefully helped me get Emma settled. Some essentials you might have forgotten to buy, and homemade cookies, because she says new mothers need sugar and comfort food. Inside the bag were newborn diapers, in 3 different sizes, baby wipes, a soft receiving blanket, and a container of Rosa's chocolate chip cookies that smelled like love and home. There was also a handwritten note. "Congratulations on your beautiful daughter. The first weeks are hard, but you're stronger than you know. Call if you need anything at all." Rosa Williams, a complete stranger, had put more thought into welcoming my daughter than my own family had, The drive home was quiet except for Emma's soft sleeping sounds. Marcus kept checking the rearview mirror, making sure she was okay, adjusting the temperature when he noticed me shivering. He drove carefully, taking corners slowly, avoiding bumps in the road. "My youngest is 3 now," he said softly, "but I remember bringing her home from the hospital. Scariest and most amazing day of my life." When we arrived at my apartment, he insisted on carrying my bags up the stairs and waited while I got settled inside. Before leaving, he looked around. My small living room, at the empty refrigerator I could see through the open kitchen, at the pile of unopened mail on the counter, at the general chaos of a life that had been interrupted by early labor. "Rosa's making extra dinner tonight," he said casually. "Lasagna and salad. Would it be okay if I brought some by around 6? She always makes too much anyway." I started to protest, to say it wasn't necessary, but he held up a hand. "My wife had 4 babies," he said. "She knows what new mothers need, and she'd be offended if I didn't offer. Besides, you helped us that night too." "Helped you how?" "Reminded me why I do this job," he said simply. "Not everyone gets to be present for the important moments in people's lives. That night, I got to help bring a baby into the world. That's something I'll remember forever." He left his card on my counter with Rosa's phone number written on the back. "Call us," he said. "Day or night, we mean it." That evening, Marcus returned with Rosa and their youngest daughter, carrying containers of food that smelled incredible. Rosa was a small, energetic woman with laugh lines around her eyes and an immediately comforting presence. "Let me see this beautiful baby," she said, washing her hands before gently taking Emma from my arms. "Oh, she's perfect. Look at those little fingers." While Rosa cooed over Emma, Marcus, and their daughter, Sophia, set up dinner in my kitchen. Real food, homemade lasagna, fresh salad, garlic bread, and a chocolate cake that Rosa had baked that afternoon, because new mothers need celebration. "How are you feeling?" Rosa asked, settling beside me on the couch while still holding Emma. Really feeling not just the polite answer. I found myself telling her the truth about being exhausted and overwhelmed, about not knowing if I was doing anything right, about feeling isolated and scared. I told her about my family's absence, about spending labor alone, about the silence. From everyone who was supposed to care. Rosa listened without judgment, nodding and making soft sounds of understanding. When I finished, she handed Emma back to me and took my hands in hers. "Family isn't always blood," she said firmly. "Sometimes the people who love you best are the ones who choose to show up. And honey, anyone who doesn't show up when you're having a baby doesn't deserve the title of family." Over the following weeks, Marcus and Rosa became my chosen family. Rosa stopped by every few days with food and baby supplies, always with practical advice and emotional support. Marcus drove me to Emma's pediatric appointments when David couldn't get off work, never accepting payment and always waiting to make sure everything was okay. Sophia, who was 8, appointed herself as Emma's big sister, bringing drawings she'd made and reading stories in her serious, careful voice. Their teenage sons helped carry groceries and assembled the crib that David and I had been too overwhelmed to tackle. The Williams family celebrated Emma's 1-month birthday with a small party in my apartment balloons. Cake and presents they couldn't afford but gave anyway. They took photos and made a fuss over every milestone, treating my daughter like she was as precious to them as she was to me. Meanwhile, my actual family had called exactly twice. Once when Dad needed a ride to his cardiologist because Emma was too busy, and once when Mom wanted to know if I could still handle their prescription. Pickups now that I had a baby. Neither call included asking how Emma was doing or if I needed anything. Marcus's business card sat on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet Rosa had brought that said, "Love makes a family." It became a symbol of something I'd never experienced before. Unconditional support, without expectation of anything in return. The contrast was stark and painful. Strangers had stepped into the role my family should have played, offering the love and support I craved my entire life. They'd shown me what it felt like to be valued, to be cared for, to matter to people who chose to love me rather than people who were obligated to do so. And slowly, I began to understand that if strangers could love me and my daughter this fully, this generously, then maybe the problem wasn't that I was unlovable. Maybe the problem was that I'd been seeking love from people who simply weren't capable of giving it. The private investigator's business card came from an unexpected source. David's colleague mentioned him during a casual conversation about family legal issues. Tom Rivera is discreet and thorough, David had said when he brought the card home. If there's something to find, he'll find it. I'd been holding the card for 3 weeks before I finally called. Sitting in my car outside Emma's pediatrician's office after another appointment I'd handled alone, my sister had texted that morning asking if I could drive Dad to his physical therapy because she had a work thing. And something about the casual expectation in her message had triggered a fury I didn't know I possessed. I was tired of being their default solution to every problem while receiving nothing in return. But more than that, I was starting to suspect there was more to the family financial situation than anyone had told me. Tom. Rivera's office was smaller than I'd expected, tucked between a tax preparation service and a bail bondsman in a strip mall across town. But Tom himself was exactly what I'd hoped for: calm, professional, and completely unimpressed by family drama. "Tell me what you're looking for," he said, settling behind his desk with a legal pad and pen. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared copies of Grandma Rose's will, the inheritance distribution, documentation of all the money I'd spent on my parents' care, and a timeline of family financial decisions that had been bothering me. "I want to understand how my family's finances really work," I said. "My grandmother left me responsible for my parents' care, but gave my sister the valuable assets. I've been covering thousands in medical expenses while my sister lives in a house she inherited free and clear. But lately, I'm wondering if there's more to it." Tom reviewed the documents carefully, asking questions about timing and amounts. When I mentioned Emma's mysterious financial struggles despite her inherited assets, he made notes in the margins. "What specifically made you suspicious?" he asked. I thought about it carefully. "Small things that didn't add up. Emma saying she was financially stressed while posting expensive vacation photos. My parents needing help with basic living expenses despite having pensions and Social Security. Everyone acting like I was the only one who could afford to help with care costs, but no one explaining why. Family financial abuse is more common than people think," Tom said matter-of-factly. "Often, one family member becomes designated as the responsible party while others benefit from their sacrifice. Sometimes it's unconscious, sometimes it's very deliberate." He explained his process. He'd start with public records, property transactions, business filings, anything that painted a picture of the family's actual financial situation. He'd look into Emma's finances, my parents' assets, and any unusual patterns of spending or transfers. "This might take a few weeks," he warned, "and you might not like what I find." "I need to know," I said. "For my daughter's sake, if nothing else. I can't keep sacrificing her future for people who might be taking advantage of me." The first report arrived 2 weeks later, and it was more damning than I'd expected. Emma's house, the one she'd inherited free and clear, had been refinanced twice in the past 18 months. She'd pulled out over $150,000 in equity, far more than any reasonable renovation would cost. The money had gone into personal accounts, not home improvements. Meanwhile, Derek's struggling business was actually quite profitable, with tax records showing substantial income. Their financial stress was manufactured, the result of overspending on lifestyle expenses rather than actual hardship. But the most shocking discovery was about my parents. They weren't broke. Not even close. Dad's pension was larger than I'd been led to believe, and Mom had a substantial retirement account she'd never mentioned. They owned investment properties I didn't know about, 3 rental units that generated monthly income. Their combined assets were worth over $800,000, not including the investment properties. Yet I'd been covering their medical expenses, grocery bills, and daily living costs for 2 years. Tom's second report revealed the truth about how this had happened. Emma had been managing their finances for the past 3 years, supposedly to help them navigate retirement planning. She'd convinced them to route all their medical bills and many other expenses through me, telling them it was for tax purposes and that I'd be reimbursed from the estate. There was no estate planning for such reimbursements. Emma had simply been using me as a free loan service while collecting management fees from my parents' investment accounts. The pattern was sophisticated and deliberate. Emma would review their monthly expenses, determine which ones to send to me, and pocket the difference. My parents, trusting their golden child daughter to handle complicated financial matters, never questioned the arrangement. I'd been subsidizing my parents' comfortable retirement while Emma skimmed profits from managing their wealth, all while being told I was the only one who could afford to help. The only one responsible enough to handle their care. The final piece of Tom's investigation revealed the cruelest detail of all. The family group chat I'd seen screenshots of during the reunion weekend had additional messages I'd never been included in. A separate chat called Family Planning that included Emma, Mom, Dad, and several other relatives. In those messages, they discussed my helper role as if it were a job assignment rather than a family relationship. They coordinated who would ask me for what favors, discussed my availability around my pregnancy and David's travel schedule, and even joked about my reliability and always saying yes to their requests. Emma had written, "Sarah's so predictable. Just tell her it's for Mom and Dad's health and she'll do anything. It's actually kind of sweet how naive she is about money." Mom had replied, "She's always been our little caretaker. It's what makes her happy." They'd turned my love for them into a weakness to exploit. They'd systematized my generosity and made it into a family joke. Sitting in my living room with Tom's reports spread across my coffee table, I felt something break inside me, not my heart, which had been breaking slowly for years, but something more fundamental. My willingness to believe the best in people who had shown me exactly who they were. For the first time in my life, I had proof that I wasn't paranoid or oversensitive or misunderstanding the situation. I had documentation that my family had been deliberately taking advantage of me while maintaining the fiction that they loved and appreciated me. Tom's business card went back on my refrigerator next to Marcus's, but now it represented something different. Not just investigation, but preparation. Because armed with the truth about who my family really was, I could finally decide who I wanted to be in return. The bank statements Tom had obtained through his investigation painted a picture of financial manipulation so systematic it took my breath away. Spread across my dining room table were 3 years of documents that revealed the true scope of how my family had been using me. The first stack showed my parents' actual income and assets. Dad's monthly pension, $4,200. Mom's Social Security and retirement. Account distributions, $2,800. Rental income from properties I'd never known existed, $3,600. Their total monthly income was over $10,000. Yet I'd been covering expenses that totaled nearly $3,000 monthly because they told me they were struggling to make ends meet. The second stack revealed Emma's financial management fees and how she'd been systematically redirecting their expenses to me. She'd been charging my parents $500 monthly to manage their portfolio, while simultaneously ensuring that I paid for their daily living costs. The investment properties alone generated enough income to cover all their medical expenses, but Emma had convinced them to route those bills through me instead. The most damning evidence was in the third. Stack Emma's personal financial records. Despite claiming financial hardship, she and Derek had been living far beyond any reasonable means. Monthly spa treatments, designer clothing purchases, expensive dinners, weekend getaways that cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. The house refinancing had funded a lifestyle that was completely unsustainable, but they'd been using my money to subsidize their basic expenses while splurging on luxuries. Found receipts for purchases that made my stomach turn. A $2,000 handbag bought the same week I'd paid $1,800 for Dad's cardiac medication. A weekend in Napa that cost $3,500. Purchased 3 days after I'd covered Mom's physical therapy bills. Designer shoes that cost more than I spent on maternity. Clothes for my entire pregnancy. But the cruelest discovery was a series of transactions that showed Emma had been collecting a caregiver coordination fee from my parents' accounts. For 3 years, she'd been charging them $300 monthly for managing Sarah's involvement in their care. She'd literally been profiting from my unpaid labor while I sacrificed my own financial security to help them. David found me that evening surrounded by papers, trying to calculate exactly how much money I'd given to people who were already financially comfortable. The total was staggering, $47,000 over 2.5 years. Money that should have gone to our house down payment, our emergency fund, our daughter's college savings. This is financial abuse, David said quietly, reviewing the documents. They've been deliberately deceiving you about their financial situation while enriching themselves from your generosity. The pattern became clear once I understood the full scope. Emma had positioned herself as the family financial manager, giving her access to my parents' accounts and decision-making power over their expenses. She'd then systematically shifted their costs to me while keeping their income for lifestyle. Enhancement. My parents weren't victims in this scheme. They were active participants. The bank statements showed they'd been fully aware of their actual financial situation. They'd signed off on Emma's management fees, approved the expense redirections, and never once questioned why I was paying for things they could easily afford. They'd chosen to let me struggle financially while they maintained comfortable retirements, funded by rental properties I didn't know existed. The investigation revealed other layers of deception. The family reunion weekend hadn't just excluded me from celebration. It had been partially funded by money I'd given them for emergency medical expenses. Emma had used $1,200 of my contribution toward Dad's supposed surgery cost to pay for the decorations, food, and gifts for Michelle's baby shower. I'd literally paid for my own exclusion from family celebration. The business loan rejection that had crushed my entrepreneurial dreams made sense now too. My debt-to-income ratio looked terrible because I was carrying expenses that should have been paid by people with substantial assets. The bank had seen someone financially overextended, not knowing that I was being systematically exploited by my own family. Tom's final report included a timeline that showed how the manipulation had escalated after major life events. When I'd gotten married, the requests for help had increased. When I'd gotten promoted, suddenly my parents had more emergencies that required financial assistance. When I'd announced my pregnancy, Emma had refined the system to ensure I'd remain available for both financial support and physical caregiving. They'd literally calibrated their exploitation based on my capacity to give. The most heartbreaking document was a handwritten note Tom had found in Emma's financial files. It was a list titled Sarah Management, with bullet points about how to maximize my contributions. Always frame requests as medical emergencies. Emphasize how much better she is at handling complex situations. Make sure she feels needed and appreciated. Never let her see the full financial picture. Keep her focused on caregiving duties so she doesn't have time to question expenses. I wasn't their daughter or sister in their minds. I was a resource to be managed and optimized, sitting alone that night. After David had gone to bed, I looked at my sleeping daughter and made a promise. She would never experience the kind of systematic exploitation I'd endured. She would grow up understanding that love doesn't require financial sacrifice, that family doesn't mean accepting being used, and that generosity should be reciprocal. Bank statements would become evidence, but more than that, they were proof of my own worth. For years, I'd questioned whether I was being too sensitive, too suspicious, too demanding, and expecting basic fairness from my family. Now I had documentation that my instincts had been right all along. I'd been supporting people who were wealthier than I was while sacrificing my own family's future. I'd been paying for the privilege of being treated as less than, of being excluded and dismissed and taken for granted. But armed with the truth about their financial situation, I finally had the power to change the dynamic. The question now wasn't whether they'd been using me. It was what I planned to do about it. The bankruptcy documents were the smoking gun I'd been looking for without knowing it. Hidden beneath Emma's carefully curated social media posts and designer lifestyle was a financial disaster so complete that it explained everything about her. RecentBehavior.com had discovered them buried in court records from 6 months earlier. Emma Richardson, she kept her maiden name for financial purposes, had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection, listing debts of over $280,000 against assets worth less than $40,000. The house she'd inherited was the only thing protecting her from complete financial ruin, and even that was mortgaged to the limit. The debt breakdown was stunning in its recklessness. Credit cards maxed out at predatory interest rates, personal loans from payday lenders, a car loan for a BMW she clearly couldn't afford, and medical debt from cosmetic procedures that Derek's insurance wouldn't cover. She owed money to stores, spas, travel companies, and at least 6 different credit counseling services she'd tried and abandoned. But the most revealing detail was buried in the bankruptcy filing statement of income and expenses. Emma had listed family financial management as a source of income, claiming she earned $800 monthly helping relatives with their finances. She turned her exploitation of my parents, and by extension, my into a documented revenue stream for bankruptcy court. She'd literally sworn under oath that managing our family's finances was how she paid her bills. The timeline told the real story of Emma's golden child facade. 3 years ago, when she'd first offered to help my parents with their complicated finances, she'd actually been drowning in debt from her and Derek's overspending. The financial management role wasn't generosity, it was a desperate attempt to access their assets while shifting their expenses to someone else. Every time she told me about her own financial struggles, she'd been telling the truth. The lie was about the cause. She wasn't struggling because Derek's business was slow or because maintaining the inherited house was expensive. She was struggling because she'd spent years living a lifestyle funded entirely by credit, and now the bills were coming due. Bankruptcy documents revealed purchases that made her recent behavior even more insulting. The day after I'd covered $1,200 for Dad's emergency medical expenses, Emma had charged $900 at a spa for stress relief treatments. The week I paid for Mom's prescription medications because they were short on cash. Emma had spent $1,500 on a designer handbag to celebrate Derek's latest business contract. She'd been using my money to fund her therapy while creating the stress that made therapy necessary, but the cruelest detail was in the court documents about asset protection. Emma's bankruptcy attorney had advised her to maintain family financial arrangements that provide necessary income, specifically recommending she continue managing my parents' accounts and coordinating family care responsibilities with appropriate family members. The lawyer had literally advised her to keep exploiting me as part of her bankruptcy recovery strategy. Looking at Derek's financial statements within the bankruptcy filing revealed another layer of deception. His business wasn't struggling, it was deliberately structured to minimize reported income while maximizing hidden assets. They'd been playing complex financial games, shifting money between personal and business accounts, claiming losses that didn't exist, and manipulating their tax situation to appear less wealthy than they were. Derek's business had been profitable. The entire time Emma had been claiming they needed help. They'd simply been spending money faster than they could steal it from family members and credit companies. The bankruptcy also explained Emma's recent desperation about maintaining her role in the family. Without access to my parents' accounts and her ability to redirect their expenses to me, she had no legitimate income source. Her entire post-bankruptcy financial plan depended on continuing to exploit our family relationships, which explained why she'd been so dismissive of my pregnancy and needs. A new baby meant I might be less available to subsidize their lifestyle. My growing awareness of the family's financial dynamics threatened her carefully constructed system of manipulation. Tom had also discovered that Emma had been in contact with a family law attorney about inheritance protection. She'd been exploring ways to ensure that any future changes to my parents' estate planning wouldn't affect her access to their assets. She'd literally been plotting to maintain her financial advantage over me while I was pregnant and vulnerable. Golden child image had been a complete fabrication, maintained through credit-funded lifestyle purchases and systematic financial abuse of family members. Emma wasn't successful, beloved, or financially secure. She was desperate, manipulative, and completely dependent on other people's money to maintain her facade. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was a series of emails between Emma and Derek discussing their long-term financial strategy. They'd calculated how much money they could extract from my parents over their estimated remaining lifespan, factoring in my willingness to supplement their care costs. They'd literally put a dollar value on my love and created a business plan around exploiting it. One email from Emma to Derek was particularly chilling. Sarah's so committed to being the good daughter that she'll never question where the money goes. As long as we frame everything as being for mom and dad's care, she'll keep paying. We just need to make sure she doesn't get too independent or start asking the wrong questions. They've been strategizing about how to keep me financially and emotionally dependent on them, ensuring I'd remain available as their personal ATM. Reading those bankruptcy documents, I finally understood that Emma's treatment of me hadn't been casual selfishness or family favoritism. It had been calculated financial predation disguised as family dynamics. She'd weaponized my love for our parents and my desire to be a good daughter, turning my strongest qualities into tools for her personal enrichment. The golden child had been bankrupt all along, propped up by stolen money and sustained by lies. And I'd been the one paying for her crown. Attorney Margaret Chen's office overlooked the city from the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made everything below look small and manageable. I'd chosen her specifically because Tom Rivera had recommended her as someone who specialized in family financial abuse cases and wasn't afraid of complicated family dynamics. The consultation notes she took that day would become my roadmap for everything that followed. What you're describing is textbook financial elder abuse, Margaret said after reviewing Tom's investigation reports. Your sister has been systematically exploiting your parents' assets while manipulating you into subsidizing their care. The fact that she's been collecting fees for managing their accounts makes this even more serious. I'd brought every document Tom had uncovered: bank statements, the bankruptcy filing, email screenshots, even printouts of Emma's social media posts showing her expensive lifestyle. Margaret reviewed each piece carefully, making notes in the margins and asking detailed questions about timing and family dynamics. The key issue here is that your parents appear to be complicit, she explained. They're not incapacitated, so they're legally able to make decisions about their finances, even poor ones. but your sister's actions, particularly collecting management fees while redirecting expenses to you, cross several legal lines. Margaret outlined my options with the clinical precision I needed to hear. I could file complaints with Adult Protective Services about the financial abuse of my parents. I could pursue civil litigation against Emma for fraud and conversion of family assets. I could report her bankruptcy filing as potentially fraudulent, since she'd failed to disclose income from managing family finances. But she also explained the emotional cost of legal action against family members. These cases tend to destroy family relationships permanently, she warned. Even when you win, you lose in terms of family connections. You need to decide if you're prepared for that outcome. I thought about the family connections I'd supposedly be losing: people who had refused to drive me to the hospital during labor, who had systematically exploited my generosity, who had turned my love into a business opportunity. What about protecting my daughter's future? I asked. That's actually the strongest legal argument you have, Margaret said. Your sister's actions have directly impacted your ability to provide for your child. The money you've spent on unnecessary family expenses could have gone to your daughter's college fund, medical care, or housing. Financial abuse of one family member often impacts multiple generations. She walked me through the process of documenting everything for potential legal action, while also creating boundaries that would protect me going forward. The immediate goal wasn't necessarily to file lawsuits, but to gather enough evidence that my family would understand I was serious about stopping their exploitation. Sometimes the threat of legal action is enough to change behavior, she explained. When people realize their victim understands the law and has documentation, they often prefer to resolve things quietly rather than face public scrutiny. Margaret also helped me understand my rights regarding my parents' care. Despite what my family had told me, I had no legal obligation to provide financial support for parents who had substantial assets of their own. The inheritance that had made me their designated caregiver was symbolic, not legally binding. You can stop paying their expenses immediately, she said. You're not abandoning them. You're refusing to subsidize people who can afford their own care. There's a significant difference. The consultation notes she prepared for me became my action plan. Immediate cessation of all financial support for family members, written notification to Emma about the end of her financial management role direct. Communication with my parents about their actual financial situation, documentation of all money I provided over the past 3 years, demand for repayment of funds that had been obtained through deception, clear boundaries about future family interactions. Margaret also prepared a letter to be sent to Emma, formal enough to demonstrate legal seriousness, but not aggressive enough to escalate unnecessarily. The letter would inform her that I was aware of the true family financial situation, that I would no longer be providing subsidies for expenses my parents could afford, and that I expected immediate changes to their financial arrangements. Goal is to stop the abuse while giving them a chance to save face, Margaret explained. If they refuse to make changes or become retaliatory, then we move to more serious legal action. She also helped me prepare for the emotional manipulation that would inevitably follow. Family members who had been financially exploiting someone rarely accepted boundaries gracefully. I should expect guilt trips about abandoning the family, claims that I was misunderstanding the situation, and attempts to make me feel selfish for protecting my own interests. Remember that their reaction will tell you everything you need to know, Margaret said. People who genuinely care about you will be horrified to learn they've been hurting you financially. People who see you as a resource will be angry that the resource is no longer available. The legal consultation gave me something I'd never had before: professional validation that I wasn't being unreasonable or selfish. Margaret treated my situation as a clear case of financial abuse, not a family disagreement or misunderstanding. She saw Emma's actions as predatory, not just thoughtless. You've been subsidizing people who are wealthier than you are, she said bluntly. That's not family obligation, that's exploitation, and you have every right to stop it. Walking out of Margaret's office that afternoon, I felt like I was carrying a weapon I'd never had before knowledge of my legal rights and professional support for exercising them. The consultation notes in my purse were more than legal advice. They were permission to value myself and my daughter above people who had shown they didn't value us at all. For the first time in my adult life, I had a plan that put my own family's needs first. And I had legal backing for the boundaries I was about to set. The scared, pregnant woman who had been abandoned during labor was gone. In her place was a mother who understood that protecting her child meant stopping the cycle of exploitation that had defined her own childhood. Margaret's business card joined. The others on my refrigerator Marcus for unconditional support, Tom for truth, and now Margaret for justice. The tools I needed to rebuild my life on my own terms. The family meeting I called for Sunday afternoon would be the last one where I played by their rules. I'd asked everyone to come to my parents' house neutral territory, where we could spread out all the documents I'd brought in clear plastic. Folders, each one labeled and organized like the business presentation this essentially was. I arrived early and set up the dining room table like a conference room. Tom's investigation reports in the center, Margaret's legal consultation notes to my left, and my own calculations of financial impact to my right. My phone was recording, as Margaret had advised. Positioned discreetly but capturing everything. Emma arrived first, looking annoyed at being summoned, but trying to mask it with false concern. Is everything okay? She asked, eyeing the papers spread across the table. Your message sounded so urgent. Everything's fine, I said calmly. We just need to discuss some family financial matters. Mom and Dad arrived together, both looking confused about why I'd called a formal meeting. They settled into their usual chairs while Emma positioned herself across from me, her defensive posture already signaling she suspected this wasn't going to go her way. I've discovered some things about our family's financial situation that we need to address, I began, pulling out the first folder. Specifically about the actual state of Mom and Dad's finances and how family expenses have been managed over the past 3 years. I started with the simplest facts, their real monthly income versus what I'd been told, the existence of rental properties I'd never known about, and the discovery that they were worth over $800,000 while I'd been paying their daily expenses. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Sarah, honey, those are complicated financial matters. No, Dad, they're not complicated, I interrupted gently. You have substantial income and assets. You can afford your own medical bills, groceries, and living expenses. Yet I've been paying for those things while Emma collects fees for managing your accounts. Emma's face had gone pale, but she tried to maintain control. Sarah, I think you're misunderstanding how financial management works. There are tax implications and portfolio strategies that I'm not misunderstanding anything, I said, sliding Tom's report across the table. I hired a private investigator. I know about the management fees, the expense redirections, and the bankruptcy filing you forgot to mention. The word bankruptcy hit the room like a physical blow. Mom gasped, and Dad leaned forward to grab the document I placed in front of him. You filed for bankruptcy? Mom asked Emma, her voice rising. When? Why didn't you tell us? Emma was scrambling now, her carefully maintained composure cracking. It was just a strategic financial restructuring. The lawyer said it was the best way to handle some temporary cash flow issues. $280,000 in debt isn't temporary cash flow, I said, consulting my notes, enlisting family financial management as income in your bankruptcy filing while collecting fees from Mom and Dad's accounts is fraud. The room went completely silent except for the sound of papers rustling as my parents read through the bankruptcy documents. I watched their faces change as they processed what Emma had been doing with their money while claiming to help them. "You've been charging us to manage our accounts while making Sarah pay our bills," Dad asked slowly. "It's not that simple," Emma started. "It's exactly that simple," I said, pulling out another folder. "Here are copies of every expense I've covered over the past 3 years. $47,000 for medical bills, groceries, utilities, and other costs that you could easily afford from your monthly income alone." I handed them the calculation sheets showing how their rental income alone would have covered every expense I'd been paying, with money left over for savings. "Sarah, we had no idea," Mom said, her voice shaking. "Emma told us that having you handle certain expenses was better for tax purposes, that you'd be reimbursed." "From what estate planning?" I asked. "There are no provisions for reimbursing me." Emma made that up to justify a system where she profits from managing your wealth while I subsidize your lifestyle. Emma finally found her voice, but it came out as an attack. "You're being incredibly selfish. Sarah, I've been trying to help the family navigate complicated financial situations while you complain about contributing to your own parents' care." "Help the family?" I stood up and walked around the table to face her directly. "You've been using me as an unpaid loan service while charging Mom and Dad for the privilege. You've been taking management fees while redirecting their expenses to someone making less money than they are." I pulled out the most damaging document, the email chain where she and Derek had calculated how much money they could extract from our parents over their estimated remaining lifespan. "You literally created a business plan around exploiting my love for them," I said, reading her own words back to her. "Sarah's so committed to being the good daughter that she never questioned where the money goes." The email hit Mom like a physical blow. She looked at Emma with an expression I'd never seen before, complete devastation mixed with dawning understanding. "You wrote that about your sister?" Mom whispered. Emma was backed into a corner now, and like any trapped animal, she got vicious. "Fine. Yes, I've been managing their finances in a way that works for everyone. You want to be the martyr, Sarah? You want to be the one everyone depends on?" "Well, this is what that costs." "No," I said quietly. "This is what being systematically exploited costs, and it stops today." I handed them Margaret's letter, formally ending all financial support and demanding repayment of funds obtained through deception. I also gave them copies of everything I'd discovered so they could make informed decisions about their own financial management going forward. "You're cutting off your own parents?" Emma asked incredulously. "I'm refusing to subsidize people who are wealthier than I am," I corrected. "Mom and Dad can afford their own care. They always could. The only question is whether you'll stop profiting from pretending otherwise." Dad was reading through all the documents, his business background helping him understand the scope of Emma's manipulation faster than Mom. When he looked up, his expression was one of profound disappointment. "Emma, how could you do this to your sister? To us?" "I was trying to help. You were stealing," I said simply, "from them and from me. And when I had my baby, when I needed family support the most, you were too busy protecting your income stream to drive me to the hospital." Recording captured Emma's final response, the moment when her mask slipped completely and revealed who she really was underneath. "You think you're so perfect, Sarah? So selfless and giving? You're just naive. This is how families work. Some people contribute, others coordinate. If you're too stupid to understand the value of financial management, that's not my problem." She gathered her purse and stood to leave, but not before delivering one final blow. "Good luck taking care of them without my help. Let's see how long your martyrdom lasts when you're dealing with everything alone." After she left, the three of us sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Dad spoke. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. We had no idea what she was doing to you. We would never have agreed to this if we'd understood," Mom added. tears streaming down her face. I believed them, but I also knew that good intentions didn't erase the impact of their choices. They'd been willfully ignorant about their finances, content to let Emma handle everything as long as they didn't have to think about it. Going forward, you'll need to manage your own finances, I said. I'll help you find a reputable financial advisor if you want, but I won't be subsidizing expenses. You can afford any more. They nodded, still processing the scope of what had been done in their names. The recorded confrontation became evidence, but more than that, it became the moment when I finally said everything I'd been holding inside for 28 years. The moment when I stopped protecting people who had never protected me and started protecting the family that actually mattered: David, Emma Rose, and me. The court summons arrived 3 weeks after our family confrontation, but not for the reasons I'd expected. Instead of Emma facing legal consequences for financial fraud, I was being sued for elder abandonment and willful neglect of family obligations. Emma had moved faster than I'd anticipated, filing a civil suit that painted me as a selfish daughter who had abandoned her aging parents in their time of need. The legal documents were masterfully crafted, describing years of dedicated caregiving that I had suddenly and callously withdrawn, leaving my parents vulnerable and without support. The lawsuit carefully omitted any mention of their actual financial situation, the rental properties, or Emma's management fees. Instead, it painted a picture of elderly parents dependent on their devoted daughter's care, suddenly abandoned by a sibling who had become selfish after having a baby. Margaret Chen was furious when she read the complaint. "This is a classic Darvo tactic," she explained. "Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. She's trying to make you the perpetrator and herself the victim before you can file complaints against her." But Emma had miscalculated. By filing a lawsuit, she'd opened herself up to discovery, which meant Margaret could now legally demand all of her financial records, the family's correspondence, and detailed documentation of exactly how my parents' care had been managed. "She just gave us a legal pathway to expose everything," Margaret said with satisfaction. "We'll use her own lawsuit to prove financial fraud." The next month became a masterclass in how consequences work when someone finally stops enabling bad behavior. Without my financial subsidies, my parents had to face the reality of managing their own substantial assets. Dad, once he understood how much money they actually had, was appalled by the charade Emma had orchestrated. He immediately fired her as their financial manager and hired a legitimate financial advisor who couldn't believe they'd been claiming poverty while sitting on such significant wealth. Mom struggled more with the emotional reality. For 3 years, she genuinely believed they were financially fragile and that my contributions were necessary for their survival. Learning that she'd been manipulated into accepting help they didn't need while I sacrificed my own family security was devastating. For her, "I feel like such a fool," she told me during one of our new, carefully boundaried conversations. I trusted Emma to handle things. I should have been paying attention to myself. The rental properties alone generated enough income to cover all their living expenses with money left over. Dad took over managing them directly and discovered that Emma had been skimming from the rental income as well, claiming various management expenses that had never been incurred. Emma's reaction to losing her income stream was swift and vindictive. She began calling extended family members, telling them I had abandoned my parents and was preventing her from helping them. She painted herself as the devoted daughter trying to care for aging parents while being blocked by a selfish sister who cared more about money than family. But the family members she called weren't as sympathetic as she'd expected. Word had gotten out about the investigation, and most of them had questions about the inheritance distribution and Emma's financial management that she couldn't answer convincingly. Aunt Linda, who had initially been concerned about my abandonment, of family duties changed her tune completely after Dad showed her the financial documents. Emma's been living in that inherited house while making you pay for your parents' groceries? She asked incredulously. That's not family obligation, that's exploitation. The bankruptcy court became interested in Emma's case when Margaret provided them with evidence of undisclosed income from family financial management. Emma's attorney had filed documents claiming she had no significant income sources, but the bank records showed thousands of dollars in management fees and redirected family expenses. Within 2 months, Emma was facing bankruptcy fraud charges, and Derek's business was under investigation for tax evasion related to their income manipulation schemes. But the most satisfying consequence was watching their carefully constructed lifestyle collapse. Without access to my parents' accounts and my financial contributions, Emma and Derek couldn't maintain their spending patterns. The house refinancing payments became unmanageable, the luxury purchases stopped, and the social media posts of expensive vacations disappeared. Emma tried to find work. The 3 years of gaps in her employment history while managing family finances made her essentially unemployable in any professional capacity. Derek's business faced penalties and back taxes that consumed most of their hidden assets. 6 months after our confrontation, they were forced to sell the inherited house to cover their debts and legal expenses. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emma had fought so hard to maintain access to family money that she'd lost the family house entirely. My parents, meanwhile, were thriving under honest financial management. Dad had always been good with money when he was working, and he took over their financial planning with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been artificially sidelined from his own life. They hired a housekeeper, upgraded their healthcare plans, and started taking vacations they could easily afford but had been claiming were impossible. Mom joined a senior center and made friends outside the family for the first time in years. Without the artificial crisis of financial insecurity, she had energy and time for activities she'd given up when Emma had convinced her they needed to be careful with money. The lawsuit Emma had filed against me was quietly dropped when her attorney realized that discovery would expose her to criminal fraud charges. Margaret had prepared a countersuit that would have bankrupted Emma further and potentially resulted in jail time. Sometimes the best legal strategy is just letting someone dig their own grave, Margaret explained. The court summons that had initially terrified me became a symbol of justice working exactly as it should. Emma's attempt to manipulate the legal system had backfired completely, exposing her crimes and protecting my family from future exploitation, but the real consequence wasn't legal. It was the complete reversal of family dynamics. Emma had spent decades being the favored child, protected and provided for by everyone around her. Now she was facing the natural results of her choices without a family safety net to cushion the fall. I wasn't angry anymore, watching her face the consequences of her actions. I felt something I'd never experienced in relation to my family: peace. For the first time in my life, the right person was dealing with the problems they'd created. My daughter would grow up in a world where actions had consequences, where people who chose to harm others faced appropriate results, and where being reliable didn't mean accepting exploitation. The court summons stayed in my files as evidence, but more importantly, as proof that sometimes justice really does prevail when someone finally has the courage to demand it. Emma Rose Mitchell's birth certificate sits in a fireproof safe now, next to the deed to our new house and the business registration papers for the consulting firm I finally launched 6 months after everything changed. But it's not the birth certificate the hospital issued that first night. It's the amended one we filed when she turned 6 months old. Her name is still Emma Rose Mitchell, but now the father listed is David Alexander Mitchell, and the mother is Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. What changed was the emergency contact section, which no longer lists any biological family members. Instead, It lists Marcus and Rosa Williams as emergency contacts, with their relationship designated as chosen family. The house we bought isn't large or fancy, but it's ours. 3 bedrooms, a backyard where Emma Rose can play safely, and most importantly, a mortgage we can afford without sacrificing her future. The down payment came from money that would have gone to subsidize people who were wealthier than we were money. I reclaimed not through legal action, but through the simple act of refusing to continue paying at Dot, my consulting business launched with 3 clients, and has grown to 12 in the past year. The expertise I developed managing complex family financial situations translated perfectly into helping small businesses organize their finances and plan for growth. The irony isn't lost on me that the skills Emma had exploited became the foundation for my own success. David and I work from home now, taking turns caring for Emma Rose and managing our respective businesses. Some evenings we sit on our back porch while she plays in her sandbox, and I still can't quite believe this life is real, this quiet, stable life where no one takes more than they give, where love doesn't require financial sacrifice, where family means showing up consistently rather than just when it's convenient. Marcus and Rosa have become her de facto grandparents, the ones who remember every milestone, who babysit when David and I need date nights, who treat her birthday like a national holiday worthy of extensive celebration. They've taught her to say please and thank you in both English and Spanish, and she calls them Abuelo Marcus and Abuela Rosa with the unconscious confidence of a child who has never doubted that she is loved. My biological parents see Emma Rose occasionally, but on my terms now. They've become polite grandparents rather than demanding authority figures, understanding that their relationship with their granddaughter depends on respecting the boundaries I've established. Dad sends a birthday card each year with a check for her college fund, a gesture that would have meant more if it hadn't taken a family crisis for him to acknowledge that my daughter's future mattered. Mom tries harder, but there's an awkwardness in her interactions with Emma Rose that wasn't there with other grandchildren. She knows she missed the opportunity to be present for the important moments, and no amount of belated attention can undo that absence during those crucial early months. Emma, my sister, moved across the country after selling the inherited house. She sends Christmas cards with generic holiday greetings and photos of her new apartment, as if we're distant relatives who exchange pleasantries once a year. She never asks about Emma Rose, never acknowledges that she has a niece she's never met properly. Sometimes I wonder if she even remembers that her cruelty had consequences beyond her own financial situation. The night she told me to call an Uber while I was in labor wasn't just one bad decision. It was the moment that revealed who she really was beneath all the family mythology. The business cards on my refrigerator have changed over the years. Marcus's is still there, now alongside Rosa's card for her catering business, which has flourished since she started working with the families of Marcus's Uber clients. Tom Rivera's card is there too, though now it's more sentimental than practical, a reminder that sometimes you need an objective outsider to help you see the truth about your own life. Margaret Chun's card moved to my office where it serves, as both a professional contact and a reminder that I have legal recourse if anyone tries to exploit my family again. I refer clients to her when they're dealing with their own family financial abuse situations, and she refers small business owners to me when they need financial consulting. The consulting firm has become more than just a business. It's become a way to help other people recognize and escape the kind of exploitation I endured for years. I specialize in family financial dynamics and helping clients establish healthy boundaries around money and caregiving responsibilities. Last month, I helped a woman whose siblings were pressuring her to use her inheritance to fund their various financial crises while she struggled to pay for her own children's daycare. The situation was eerily familiar, and I was able to guide her through the process of setting boundaries that protected her. family's future without destroying the family relationships that were worth preserving. How did you know exactly what they would say when I said no? She asked after our final consultation. Because I've lived this story, I told her. And I know how it ends when you choose yourself and your children over people who see you as a resource rather than a person. Emma Rose is 18 months old now, walking confidently and speaking in short sentences that never fail to amaze me. She has David's logical mind and my stubborn determination, combined with the joyfulness that comes from being unconditionally loved from the moment she drew her first breath. She'd never know what it feels like to be the overlooked child, the one expected to sacrifice her dreams for other people's comfort. She'd never wonder if she matters, because every day of her life confirms that she does. Sometimes I look at her playing with her toys or laughing at something silly David has done, and I feel a deep satisfaction that has nothing to do with revenge or vindication. It's the satisfaction of breaking a cycle, of ensuring that the next generation grows up with different expectations about family, love, and self-worth. The night she was born, abandoned by my biological family and helped by strangers who chose to care, began the most important lesson of my life. Family isn't determined by blood or obligation or shared history. Family is determined by who shows up when it matters, who celebrates your joys and supports you through your struggles, who sees your worth and chooses to honor it consistently. Emma Rose will grow up knowing that she is treasured, not because of what she can provide or how useful she is, but simply because she exists. She understands that love doesn't require sacrifice of self, that healthy relationships involve mutual care and respect, and that it's not only acceptable, but necessary to distance yourself from people who consistently harm you. The birth certificate, with the Williams family listed as emergency contacts, isn't just a legal document. It's a declaration that we choose our family based on love rather than genetics, loyalty rather than obligation, presence rather than promises. And in our small house with the backyard sandbox, surrounded by people who chose to love us, Emma Rose is learning what family really means. Not the version I grew up with, full of conditional love and unequal obligations, but the real thing, messy and imperfect, but fundamentally safe. Reliable not because of duty, but because of genuine care. This is how the story ends, not with dramatic confrontations or legal victories, but with quiet moments of contentment and a life built on foundation of mutual respect and unconditional love. My daughter will never call an Uber to get to the hospital during labor, because she'd be surrounded by people who would move mountains to be there for her important moments. And that difference, that simple, profound difference, makes everything we went through worth it.